A night in October in San Marcos began with the heat still lingering from the daytime, and a kind of stillness that made the entire industrial area seem to hold its breath. 6 police cars, sirens off, quietly lined up in front of the gate of Morelli Labs pharmaceutical plant, their blue and red lights reflecting off the metal wall of warehouse number 3. Night shift workers peered through the maintenance office window glass, watching the tactical officers fan out around the building, each gripping their flashlights like they were prepping for a covert raid. Inside the warehouse area, Samuel Drake, longtime maintenance technician, usually seen as calm and reliable, was checking the pressure gauge panel like it was just another unnoticed routine. When the loudspeaker blared, "Samuel Drake, Texas Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Athena Morelli in 2004, the officers later described how his hand froze on the shutoff valve, trembling slightly, while his face stayed eerily composed, as if he'd known this day would come, but still hoped it never would. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. A night in August in San Marcos, Texas, was steeped in the thick atmosphere of southern summer, heat still baked into the pavement, humidity coating every surface in a thin film that made the trees stand motionless, as if glued to the ground. The parking lot outside the industrial park held only a few scattered cars, sodium yellow lights casting a dull golden hue over the concrete, throwing long distorted shadows with every slight stir of the breeze. From the quality control testing rooms, Athena Morelli, 26 years old, stepped out after a late shift. She clutched her clipboard tight against her chest to shield it from the wind, carrying the mix of chemical smells and hot dust from the factory's ventilation system. Her old canvas shoes tapped lightly, but clearly on the concrete, as she crossed the empty courtyard. The surrounding air made every one of Athena's movements stand out more sharply against the shifting light and shadow from the flickering overhead lamps. She passed the internal road, leading to the employee parking lot, but turned instead toward the backyard that connected to the warehouse rows. The lighting here was noticeably dimmer, darkness creeping in, broken only by narrow strips of light from the few still working bulbs. A night shift worker standing at an outdoor control panel looked up, raised a hand in greeting, and called out a loud enough "good night" to carry over the roar of the heavy-duty fans. Athena turned her head, smiled back, the gesture brief, but showing her usual politeness. That moment passed lightly like a breath. No one paid it any extra attention, just a routine end-of-shift goodbye between two people working the late hours. Athena kept walking, her footsteps steady and even until they changed tone as she entered the smooth concrete hallway leading to the storage warehouse row. The air here carried a faint damp metallic smell, mixed with a touch of coolness from the air conditioning system, a sharp contrast to the sweltering heat of the outer yard. She raised a hand to adjust the strap of her thin jacket pocket, her eyes fixed toward the end of the hallway, where the light grew hazier. As Athena approached the corner turning into the left side warehouse area, a faint metallic clink sounded from inside, like metal pieces, tapping together, but not loud enough to draw strong attention. She paused for a second, tilting her head as if trying to pinpoint the source, then continued with a slightly quicker stride. Her figure gradually disappeared behind the wall edge, her shadow stretching and tilting with the flickering light before vanishing completely into the darkness inside. After the moment Athena entered that hallway, her phone went silent, no more responses. Her family started calling non-stop once the clock passed her usual end-of-shift time. The calls kept coming, each ring stretching longer, then switching to the cold voicemail greeting. They tried her coworkers, the shift supervisor, even the gate security, but got no answers beyond no one having seen Athena leave through the gate after work. Every one of her normal daily habits had been broken for no apparent reason. By midnight, with no sign she was safe anywhere, the family picked up the phone and called 911, the voice on the line choked with fear. "She never came home. Something's wrong. We need help." A patrol car appeared at the factory gate, while the air still carried the thick nighttime heat, its blue and red lights reflecting off the oil streaks on the pavement. 2 officers stepped out, exchanged a few words with the night shift guard, then proceeded into the premises, where everything was wrapped in such quiet that you could hear the ventilation fans turning steadily. They carried a photo of Athena to show the remaining on-duty workers, trying to pinpoint the last place she was seen. Employees on the shift said they saw Athena crossing the yard, heading toward the back warehouse row to check sample records before leaving the plant. No one confirmed she left through the main gate, and no one saw her return to the parking lot. The security gate log only recorded 3 vehicle entries and exits that night, and none matched the time Athena's shift ended. As the investigative team moved deeper into the logistics area, they passed long rows of metal walls, where dim yellow lights reflected off the uneven surfaces, creating a sense of concealment. The wide concrete floor echoed hollowly under their steps as they reached the area where Athena was reported to have turned in. One officer swept a flashlight across the warehouse row, the beam passing over bags stacked against the wall, 2 empty crates, and metal shelving racks facing the hallway. Warehouse number 3 came into view with a thin layer of dust clinging around the bottom edge, but what drew more attention was that the door wasn't fully closed. It stood ajar by a few centimeters, showing the latch hadn't been secured with the usual force to keep it shut. Factory employees insisted the warehouse doors were always closed when no one was working inside to maintain safety and climate control. No one expected it to be left open like that. One officer gently pushed the door. The hinges gave a dry creak, revealing a dim darkness mixed with the smell of industrial oil and the cool air from the cooling system. The empty space inside showed no ongoing activity. They switched on flashlights, scanning the corners. Only steel shelves, containers, and an empty inspection table. There was no sign that Athena had ever stepped in or worked there after her shift ended. What caught the investigative team's attention was the patch of floor near the door, where the thin dust layer had been lightly disturbed, as if something had been dragged across it, or someone had paused there for a moment. The mark was too vague to draw any firm conclusion, but it didn't fit the usual evenness of the floor under normal conditions. One officer turned back to request a camera check. The guard led them to the monitoring room, where flickering black and white screens recorded outside activity. The camera pointed at the warehouse row. What should have shown Athena entering displayed only a murky dark shape. Even though it was still recording, the light in the frame had dropped to near pitch black. The guard explained that the area often flickered, but the fact that it went completely dark right around the time Athena went in made everyone look closer. When they rewound the footage, they caught a faint metallic sound coming through the ambient audio system. It wasn't loud enough to register clearly, but audible when the volume was turned up. A soft clank rang out, and then vanished, suggesting metal pieces knocking together or someone brushing against equipment inside the warehouse. No one on the night shift admitted to being in the warehouse at that time. No equipment had been ordered to be moved. No incident reports had been filed. The combination of the camera suddenly going dark, the strange sound, and the door left ajar made the police realize Athena hadn't left through the usual route. If she had left the plant on her own, at the very least her car should still have been in its parking spot, or someone would have seen her pass the security gate. But everything was empty. The parking log recorded departing vehicles, and Athena's car was nowhere on that list. The officers fanned out around warehouse number 3 to look for more signs. Flashlight beams swept over dust trails on the floor, each spot examined closely to see if there were hurried footprints, signs of a struggle, or anything that could explain Athena's disappearance. But the area seemed frozen in stillness, no box out of place, nothing knocked to the floor. Everything was too neat, too perfect, too lacking in anything unusual, and that unsettled the police more than anything. When an adult leaves a workplace, they usually leave some trace of movement, personal items taken, a car driven out of the lot, or a quick message to family. Athena had done none of those things. One officer noted the initial conclusion: the disappearance happened quickly, cleanly, and without signs of preparation. Every indication of voluntary departure was absent. No one in the plant could determine which direction Athena went after turning into the warehouse area. There was no evidence she left through the gate. No sign of vehicle movement, no message, no clear signs of a struggle, but also no sign whatsoever that she chose to leave of her own free will. The only feeling left was the abnormal absence of any clues at all, a kind of emptiness that couldn't be explained, as though Athena had stepped into a patch of darkness and vanished right inside a space too small for a normal person to disappear without making any sound. The officers paced around the back area of warehouse number 3, where the light grew thinner, and the boundary between the concrete yard and the metal fence blurred into the darkness. The wind still carried the smell of industrial oil, but it was lighter than near the warehouse door. One of the officers suddenly crouched close to the ground, where his flashlight beam caught an object lying well out of place from where someone might have accidentally dropped it. It was a plastic clipboard, broken in one section, its surface scratched and warped, as if it had been slammed against some hard edge. Its position made everyone pause longer, because there was no reasonable explanation for Athena to have carried a clipboard out beyond the rear fence of the warehouse area. This wasn't the path from the QC section to the parking lot, nor was it a route for moving supplies. No one could explain what caused her clipboard to fall, break, and end up pushed right up against the fence like that. One officer picked it up, gently examining the broken edge before looking around the area, feeling something didn't line up with the normal flow of someone finishing their shift. Not far from the clipboard were 3 loose inspection sheets, pressed flat against the concrete, as if blown by the wind from their original spot. The dirt clinging to the edges of the paper was darker than the dust found inside the warehouse. These sheets had faint footprints pressed into them, the wrinkled tread pattern of a shoe sole creating blurred patches that the flashlight beam made stand out when it swept across the disturbed surface. One of the 2 officers asked the night shift employee whether the dirt in the warehouse area was this type. The employee shook his head, saying the back area floor was always kept meticulously clean, mostly cement dust and tiny metal flakes, rarely ever showing thick, dark soil like that. The papers lay in an arc shape, suggesting they had been dragged along by something moving away from the area. No one found any torn pieces or destroyed documents, but the fact that Athena had vanished, and these papers were lying outside her work zone, made the situation feel far heavier. As the investigative team examined the concrete more closely, another officer called everyone over to look at a fairly clear shoe print in the dry dust between 2 metal crates. The shoe size was much larger than the average women's shoe, with deep, wide tread patterns typical of heavy-duty industrial work boots. None of the female employees on the shift wore shoes like that. Several male employees had large shoe sizes, but none had any reason to be in this area at the exact time Athena disappeared. The footprint pointed toward the fence edge, showing someone had moved quickly, with enough force to imprint into the thin dust layer. There were no footprints matching Athena's leading in the opposite direction, which led the police to question whether she might have been intercepted before she could leave the area. One officer with a high-powered flashlight began scanning along the concrete, shining the light at a very low angle to study the surface. As the beam raked across, details hard to see with the naked eye started to appear. Long, straight but faint scratches lined up in a narrow diagonal path stretching several meters. Nothing in the warehouse was light enough to be dragged out without making a loud noise. Yet these marks didn't resemble tire tracks or equipment drag marks either. Their shape made the police consider the possibility that something of moderate weight had been pulled by hand, creating only a thin smear rather than deep gouges. No firm conclusion was reached yet, but everyone understood that smears like these didn't appear naturally. Even though the traces couldn't yet form a complete picture, every detail revealed an escalating level of abnormality: the broken clipboard, scattered documents, out-of-place dark soil, oversized industrial shoe print, and faint concrete drag marks. Any one element might be overlooked if it appeared alone in an industrial work environment, but their combination in the same space where Athena vanished no longer felt random. When the investigative team returned to the warehouse door area for another sweep, they kept checking the floor for Athena's footprints. The small shoe prints, characteristic of the kind she usually wore, appeared in the front yard section leading to the hallway. But as they neared the door of warehouse number 3, those prints stopped completely. There were no tracks leading in any other direction to show she had turned back toward the yard or left the area. The absence of turnaround tracks led the police to consider the possibility that Athena had been prevented from leaving right at that spot, unable to depart on her own free will. The silence of the area, combined with the scattered but highly suggestive chain of traces, created a faint path of movement, enough for the investigative team to imagine some kind of trajectory leading away from the scene. There was no clear map yet, no specific direction, but the arrangement of the evidence indicated that something had happened right within this narrow space, where Athena had once stepped in and never reappeared. The search of the area around the plant extended to the side roads cutting through the outskirts of San Marcos, where streetlights were sparser, and the dense tree shadows blocked much of the light filtering down onto the pavement. One search team was assigned to a stretch of road a few miles south of the plant, a low-traffic section used mostly by small trucks from nearby production facilities. An officer sweeping his flashlight along the shoulder caught a faint reflective glint, creating an unusual bright spot against the darkness. It was the windshield of a silver sedan, parked right at the edge of the side road, half its body swallowed by the deep shadow cast by the thick row of trees behind it. As they approached, the license plate confirmed this was Athena's car. The car sat eerily still, with no scratches, dents, or any signs of collision. The tires weren't flat, there were no skid marks, and no indication of sudden braking. The parking position was too straight, as if the driver had stopped calmly and deliberately. One officer tried the driver's side door. It opened immediately, unlocked. This went against everything Athena's family and co-workers described about her habits. Every time she left the car, even for just a few steps, she always locked it right away. That small detail rang like an alarm in the investigators' minds, because Athena's careful nature didn't match leaving the car unlocked like this on a remote road. When they leaned in to look inside, everything seemed normal at first glance, but became hard to explain. The driver's seat had been slid way back, to a position suited for someone much taller than Athena. She was only about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and always pulled the seat close to the steering wheel for better dashboard visibility. There was no reason for the seat to be pushed so far back, unless someone else had sat there before leaving the car. The dashboard wasn't disturbed, the radio was off, the air conditioning was set low, and there were no signs the interior had been ransacked. However, the most important items Athena always carried were completely missing. No wallet, no phone, and the keys weren't in the ignition, on the seats, or on the floor. Those 3 things she never left behind had vanished entirely, making it even harder to determine when Athena had left the vehicle. One officer opened the passenger door and inspected every small crevice closely. There were no signs of a struggle, no tears in the upholstery, no heavy footprints pressed in, no scattered objects. The steering wheel was clean, the mirrors weren't adjusted oddly. The interior was unnaturally calm, as if the car had been placed there by someone wanting to create the impression that Athena had stopped on her own and walked away. But no one believed that possibility, especially since Athena would never have left her car unlocked in a deserted place. The stillness of the car's interior added yet another layer of inconsistency. Her habits simply didn't align with the current state. The absence of any personal items left forced the investigative team to question whether Athena had left the car voluntarily. If she had stepped out on her own, her wallet and phone would surely have been with her. If she had been in danger, there would typically be signs of resistance or dropped items. None of those appeared. Analyzing the car felt like staring into an empty room, too pristine to make sense of what really happened. One officer scanned the parking location. Though this side road saw little traffic, it wasn't far from the turnoff down to Cottonwood Creek. That area was known as a damp, brush-heavy spot, where passers-by sometimes dumped trash or discarded items they no longer wanted. A few minor dumping incidents had occurred at that access point a few years earlier, giving it a reputation as a place easy to hide things. While there was no direct evidence linking anything yet, Athena's car appearing here was not a detail that could be ignored. 2 officers moved to the road's edge where the ground turned softer. Faint tire tracks showed up in the loose gravel dust, indicating Athena's sedan had turned off the main road fairly smoothly, without skids or sharp maneuvers. They crouched down for a closer look, trying to determine if there were any footprints or drag marks leading down into the lower area. The traces were too faint to form a clear picture. Silence enveloped the parking area, as the officers continued sweeping the ground around the car. A thin layer of dew still coated the windows, but there were no handprints. The trunk was securely closed, with no signs of forced entry. Flashlight beams reflected off the glass, showing nothing but emptiness inside. Though the car said nothing, its very intact condition became the biggest anomaly. When someone goes missing after leaving work, they usually leave at least some fragment of a clue, while this car just sat quietly, impossibly clean, parked in exactly the kind of spot that could mislead people into thinking Athena had driven here herself. One officer wrote in the report that the car showed multiple signs of having been deliberately staged, as if someone wanted to paint a false picture of Athena's departure from the plant. There was no clear evidence to confirm that theory yet, but the individual details, the seat pushed back, the unlocked door, the missing personal items, the parking position, made the level of irrationality grow with every angle they examined. The car offered no answers, but it opened a wider arc of suspicion, drawing the police's gaze toward the dimly lit road leading down to Cottonwood Creek, where the thick tree shadows seemed to conceal something just beyond sight. The discovery of Athena's car prompted the police to return to the plant to question the group of employees who were present near the warehouse area. Around the time she disappeared, the night shift operations office grew tense as 3 people were asked to stay for questioning: Samuel Drake from the maintenance team, Elliot Marsh, the night shift supervisor, and Victor Hale, the internal vehicle coordinator driver. These were the last 3 confirmed to have been active in the area. Athena passed through before losing contact. One by one, they were brought into a small meeting room, where officers spread out files on the table and began asking detailed questions about their work schedules. When examining the time frame from 7:30 to 8 p.m., the police noticed the statements were completely inconsistent. This period overlapped with when Athena was seen heading toward warehouse number 3. Samuel said he was checking the electrical panel behind the storage tanks. Elliot insisted he was in the office monitoring production reports, and Victor claimed he was preparing handover paperwork for the next day's shift. Yet when cross-referenced with what other employees reported seeing, everything started to fall out of normal logic. A QC worker said they had encountered Samuel in the middle passageway, leading out to the yard, while Samuel claimed he never left the electrical panel area at that time. Elliot said he never left the office, but a day shift worker reported seeing him standing near the hallway, leading toward the warehouse as they were leaving the plant. And Victor, the only one authorized to operate internal vehicles, claimed he was only in the loading area, but hallway camera footage captured his distinctive driver's cap appearing near the warehouse in a blurry frame. These contradictions weren't enough to pinpoint wrongdoing by any one person, but they were sufficient to shatter the usual sense of order in a shift's routine. Digging deeper into internal data, the police focused on Samuel's badge swipe records. He claimed he never left his repair position, but the system logged Samuel swiping into warehouse number 3, around the time close to Athena's disappearance. The issue was that the camera facing the warehouse door didn't capture him entering or standing near the area. This mismatch drew special attention from the officers, because the badge swipe showed he had approached the door, while the camera, though blurry but still operational before it went completely dark, had no images proving his presence there. The badge data also showed a few other minor anomalies in the preceding weeks, but the officers didn't yet have enough context to draw conclusions about their meaning. Meanwhile, when Elliot was questioned about his timeline, he repeatedly insisted he never left the office during the period Athena passed through the area. But the investigative team reviewed the blurry hallway camera footage near warehouse number 3, and noticed that the person's gait in the frame strongly matched Elliot's way of walking. The face couldn't be clearly seen, but the build, stride length, and shoulder tilt were very similar. When confronted, Elliot denied it and argued that blurry camera footage couldn't be used for identification, explaining that he had gone to the technical office to check internal reports. However, when timelines were cross-checked, the system showed no computer activity from him during that period, adding more ambiguity to his account. Victor, responsible for moving goods with internal vehicles, also didn't escape scrutiny. When asked about his driving schedule that night, Victor recounted the routes he took to deliver supplies between sections, but the vehicle operation logs were missing several critical minutes, with no entry or exit records from the parking area exactly when Athena was last seen. Per safety regulations, every internal vehicle had to have usage logs clearly recording the operator and operating times. Victor couldn't explain why part of the log was missing, or why his movement schedule didn't match observations reported by other employees. He only said he might have forgotten to log during the shift change. This violated protocol and raised suspicion, because no evidence confirmed where he really was during those crucial 30 minutes. The officers sat back taking notes on each person, each discrepancy, each mismatched detail. 3 men, 3 statements, 3 different gaps in time. None of the accounts held up solidly when compared to real observations around warehouse number 3. What struck the police most was that all 3 had plausible reasons to be near the warehouse. Samuel for repairs, Elliot for supervision, Victor for transport, which meant the suspect pool wasn't narrowing but actually widening. The possibility that Athena encountered one of these 3 men at the exact moment she vanished became a major unanswered question. The instability in their statements formed a messy picture. Everyone was present in the relevant area, everyone denied contact with Athena, and everyone had small traces that the police couldn't overlook. In a brief meeting right there in the plant's monitoring room, the officers discussed among themselves that something about this group of employees didn't align with the normal state of a work night. No one drew a conclusion, but they all agreed on one thing: more than one person in the group hadn't told everything they knew. During the expanded questioning, the officers returned to interview the evening shift employees, this time focusing more closely on the moment Athena was last seen, and the strange sounds that appeared around the warehouse area. A female employee from the raw materials mixing department said she heard a fairly clear metal clank, loud enough to make her look up from her work. However, she couldn't pinpoint the direction it came from, only recalling that it wasn't one of the familiar sounds like an empty container being moved, or a warehouse door slamming shut. The sound seemed isolated, brief, not repeated, like something heavy had been struck suddenly. When asked if there was any connection between that noise and Athena, the female employee insisted she couldn't be certain at all. Still, the fact that an unusual sound occurred right around the time Athena was moving from the QC area toward the warehouse prompted the police to note yet another anomaly. Elliot was called back into the interrogation room because his account of the critical time frame remained too vague. Each time he was asked about the exact moment he was in the office, Elliot's answer shifted by a few minutes, sometimes stretching more than 10 minutes compared to the previous session. When asked why he couldn't remember clearly, Elliot said the work was so similar every night that he had trouble distinguishing specific times. However, the police pointed out that a night shift supervisor was responsible for checking several key items, including temperature reports, handover logs, and safety inspections. So not recalling the period when Athena passed near his office area was hard to explain. The pressure from the questions made Elliot increasingly flustered, and that fluster didn't clarify anything. It only expanded another hazy area in his story. Samuel maintained a calm demeanor during the session. He firmly insisted he never entered warehouse number 3 that night, stating that during the entire critical period he was at the electrical panel behind the plant, checking an overloaded outlet. When the police asked about the industrial shoe print near the warehouse matching the type of safety boots he was wearing, Samuel replied that many people in the plant used the same kind of shoes, and a footprint appearing somewhere couldn't prove he was there. The officers noted his explanation, but it still didn't erase the suspicion that Samuel might have moved into the area connected to Athena without reporting it. Victor displayed a markedly different attitude, somewhat defensive when speaking about internal vehicle number 34. He explained that during the work night, he hadn't used that vehicle, and didn't understand why it had been moved from its parking spot. When asked if anyone else could have access to that vehicle, Victor shook his head, saying the vehicle keys were always kept in his personal locker. The police requested to check his locker, and Victor agreed. The vehicle key was still in the drawer, indicating that vehicle 34 had been used either unofficially, or with a spare key. When questioned about a spare key, Victor said he didn't know who had it, because the vehicle had been handed over from a previous employee before he took over the position. This raised yet another question about whether someone else could access the vehicle without Victor's permission. What made things difficult for the investigative team was that there was no evidence clear enough to hold any one of the three men accountable for Athena's disappearance. There were no direct witnesses who saw any interaction between her and these three men. There were no obvious signs of violence on the plant floor, no cries for help, no chaos. But each statement had small gaps that forced the police to look at the bigger overall picture. One person heard a metallic sound. One person misremembered the time to an extent that couldn't be explained by simple confusion. One person had badge swipe data that didn't match the recorded location. One person had a vehicle moved without usage logs. Those scattered details, when placed side by side, made the officers realize that the events on the night Athena vanished didn't unfold in a normal way. The coincidences in timing, the proximity in location, and the hazy points in the statements created a sense that there was a connection among the individuals rather than isolated actions. When they returned to the warehouse area for another sweep, the police noticed that some safety procedures had been overlooked or carried out carelessly. A few containers weren't properly labeled, some tools were left in the wrong places, the warehouse door wasn't fully closed, and the rear access gate wasn't adequately monitored. These small details didn't directly point to anyone's responsibility, but blended into the overall scene. They showed that the warehouse area operated with lax supervision, creating gaps where irregular behavior could occur without immediate detection. The investigative team noted that the working environment during the night shift in the warehouse area lacked transparency, making any conclusions difficult, because the lack of clarity from both people and procedures had formed a fog that left the entire story shrouded in doubt. Although there was no incriminating evidence, everything was gradually forming into a picture where the elements connected in an unusual way, like incomplete puzzle pieces, contributing to obscuring whatever happened on the night Athena walked into the warehouse area and never came back. The evidence collected around warehouse number 3 was transferred to the District Police Forensics Lab and began undergoing initial analysis steps. The broken clipboard, the scattered QC sheets, several samples of soil dust, and a nylon fiber were placed in individual sealed evidence bags. The forensics team examined the clipboard first. When observing the broken edge, they discovered a thin nylon fiber caught in the cracked plastic section. The fiber sample was carefully extracted with tweezers and placed under a microscope. Its twist, material, and weave pattern did not match the type of binding cord normally used in the QC department. Instead, it resembled the type of technical cord used to secure steam pressure equipment in the maintenance area. Those devices were located quite a distance from the QC section, and Athena had no work-related reason to come into contact with that type of cord. This finding led the forensics team to question why Athena's evidence item was attached to a material she didn't use during her shift. Another notable difference emerged when the team examined the QC sheets picked up near the fence. A thin layer of dark brown soil clung to the paper's edge. When this soil sample was compared to the factory floor dust, the results showed the two were completely dissimilar. The factory dust contained high levels of cement material and tiny metal particles, while the soil on the paper was the clay mix type commonly found in low-lying valley areas outside San Marcos. The forensics team noted that for the paper to pick up this soil, the evidence item must have come into contact with a surface outside the plant's enclosed production area. This created an illogical gap, because Athena's papers should only have been present in the QC area or on her path to the warehouse, and could not have carried outer region soil unless she had stepped outside the plant premises before disappearing. When they moved on to examining the concrete floor near the door of warehouse number 3, using angled lighting and marking powder, the forensics team detected faint drag marks extending along a gentle curve. The size of the marks and their very shallow depth allowed for an estimate that the dragged object weighed approximately 50 to 70 kilograms. This weight range matched the estimated body weight of Athena, according to her personnel records. No specific conclusion could yet be drawn from those drag marks, but the forensics team recorded that, per internal reports, No heavy equipment in that area had been moved during the relevant time frame. This made the presence of drag marks even harder to explain without intervention from one or more individuals. While continuing to collect debris, the forensics team noticed the scene was completely devoid of the organic traces that would typically be present in a collision or struggle. No usable fingerprints were found on the clipboard, no sweat marks, no scattered skin particles, and no easily identifiable foreign fabric fibers. Every surface touched was clean to the point of providing no useful DNA. A clean industrial scene wasn't unusual, but the absolute cleanliness raised suspicions among forensics that the relevant surfaces might no longer be in their original state. The inventory shelves inside the warehouse remained in place, yet the contact surfaces near the warehouse door lacked any residual signs of human activity, making analysis more difficult. The forensics team reviewed the security camera pointed toward the warehouse area. Although the image quality was low, they noticed the camera's angle was slightly shifted to the left, compared to the standard position recorded in the maintenance log. The shift wasn't large, but it was enough to create a blind spot right at the warehouse door section. They zoomed in on the frames, observing the transition between shots to determine whether the camera had shifted on its own or been manipulated. Looking at the fixed point behind the camera, forensics realized the change didn't match oscillations from wind or machinery vibrations. This was the type of directional shift that typically occurs when a camera is touched or gently rotated by hand, even without visible external damage. The fact that the camera didn't clearly capture the area where Athena entered posed a major obstacle to analysis and raised questions about whether it had been deliberately tampered with before Athena appeared. When compiling the observations, the forensics team began to form an initial picture of movement in the area. From the clipboard and QC papers moving off their logical path, outer region soil appearing on the documents, the industrial shoe print not matching Athena, the nylon fiber from the maintenance area, to the drag marks indicating a heavy object being pulled, all of it formed a chain of details inconsistent with Athena leaving the plant on her own 2 feet. There were no ground traces proving she walked away from warehouse number 3 under her own power. No footprints of hers led back toward the yard or toward the gate. After thorough review, forensics entered into the report their preliminary assessment that Athena could not have left the plant voluntarily under her own control. Based on what was collected, she must have been moved from the area by an external force, in a manner that left no immediately obvious direct traces. This assessment stemmed not only from the faint drag marks, but also from the complete absence of any matching footprints belonging to Athena along any exit route from the warehouse. The scattered data, when combined, created a key milestone in the initial forensic analysis. Athena did not walk away from the warehouse area on her own, meaning she was taken away in a way that specific evidence had not yet clearly determined. When the investigative team expanded their scope to the Internal Vehicle Operations Department, they began reviewing the records of every vehicle authorized to move within the plant premises on the night Athena disappeared. In this list, internal vehicle number 34 was flagged as having changed position from the start of the shift. The management system only recorded that vehicle 34 left the parking area at a time that coincided with the window of Athena's disappearance, but there was no log whatsoever naming the driver. All internal vehicles in the plant were required to be registered via badge chip or handwritten log in case of system failure, yet vehicle 34 had no data matching those regulations. This forced the police to place vehicle 34 into the group of elements that needed clarification. When asked about the vehicle's usage history, the management employee explained that vehicle 34 wasn't a new unit. It had previously belonged to a maintenance employee who left the company several years earlier. That person was described as having a habit of using vehicles without properly updating records. After he left the plant, vehicle 34 was transferred to the general operations pool without a fixed assigned driver. This meant that anyone with a key or access to a spare key could use the vehicle without specific permission from anyone. This information led the investigative team to note that responsibility for this vehicle was far less clear than for the others. The police decided to check the cell tower logs for the area around the plant and the side roads connecting to Cottonwood Creek. Although the data from 2004 wasn't as complete as modern systems, some records still existed that were sufficient to determine the approximate location of the transceiver when it received signals from Vehicle 34, which had a simple tracking device attached. The record showed that Vehicle 34 had left the plant area and appeared near Cottonwood Creek for a brief period, only a few minutes. This was the same area where Athena's car was found. While it wasn't enough to confirm the two events were directly related, the geographical overlap between the points was too striking to ignore. The timing between Vehicle 34's movement and the discovery of Athena's car didn't provide conclusive information, but the intersection of locations prompted the police to broaden the range of their questioning. When examining the surveillance cameras within the plant premises, the police discovered there was no footage whatsoever showing Vehicle 34 leaving the parking area. The cameras facing the parking lot operated normally at the start and end of the shift, but during the period when Vehicle 34 changed position, a long stretch of footage went dark and unusable. No cameras along the internal roads captured the vehicle's shape either. This became even clearer when compared to camera positions in the warehouse rows and transport areas. Every other vehicle appeared at least once on camera, but Vehicle 34 showed no sign in any frame. This absence led the police to consider the possibility that the driver was familiar with the surveillance system and had chosen the lowest risk route to avoid being recorded. Victor, the internal vehicle driver on shift, was questioned multiple times about Vehicle 34. He continued to deny using it and stated he never left vehicle number 12, which he claimed to have used for the entire duration of his shift. However, one officer pointed out that the industrial shoe print found near the warehouse had a tread pattern matching the type of boots typically issued to internal drivers. When asked, Victor said many employees also wore similar shoes. This was true, but it didn't help narrow down suspects, since at least one of the three people present near the warehouse could have been wearing that type of footwear. The investigative team inspected Vehicle 34 at the parking lot. Inside the vehicle there were no special items, nor any signs of transporting goods that night. The driver's seat was adjusted farther back than Victor's usual setting, but not different enough to identify the user. The steering wheel didn't have much sweat or fingerprint residue, and most surfaces in the cabin were fairly clean, making it difficult for forensics to determine any additional useful characteristics. A sample of dried mud clinging to the tire rim was collected. The soil color matched the area around Cottonwood Creek, but this wasn't decisive either, since many internal vehicles in the plant had traveled through that area in the past to service previous projects. The police continued exploring the possibility that Vehicle 34 was used by someone not on the active shift. This could have happened if a spare key was used. When questioned, the management department admitted they hadn't fully documented the status of spare keys for many years. No one knew exactly where the spare key was or how many people had been given access before the current management took over the role. This was an oversight that made tracing the driver of Vehicle 34 extremely difficult. The questions surrounding Vehicle 34 leaving the lot, stopping near Cottonwood Creek, not appearing on camera, and lacking usage logs made this vehicle the focal point of the investigation. Multiple layers of information piled up without a clear connection: an unsupervised vehicle, an irregular usage history, cell tower data overlapping the area where Athena was last seen, and silence in the statements of those who could have accessed it. All of it turned vehicle number 34 into an element that could not be overlooked in retracing the path leading to Athena's disappearance, even though nothing yet pointed definitively to who used it that night. As the investigative leads circling the plant, Vehicle 34, and the conflicting statements gradually stalled, the case began to enter a state of stagnation. The evidence collected so far wasn't strong enough to point toward a clear breakthrough direction. There was no body to determine the cause of disappearance, no weapon, no direct witness who saw Athena leave warehouse number 3, or interact with anyone. The scattered traces around the warehouse area, from drag marks, nylon fiber, soil dust, raised plenty of questions, but couldn't connect into a solid logical chain. Each clue felt like a puzzle piece missing its edges, impossible to fit together completely to show what had happened during the window when Athena vanished. When classifying the case in the system, Athena's file was assigned a lower safety priority than usual for a disappearance with signs of irregularity. This stemmed from a subjective assessment by the supervising officer at the time, who believed Athena might have left voluntarily since there was no direct evidence of violence. The misclassification meant the case wasn't prioritized for resources, forensic analysis took longer, and some investigative procedures were unintentionally delayed. The initial documents were transferred to storage according to standard protocol, but they weren't flagged as high risk, so they didn't end up in the urgent processing category. The incorrect assessment of the danger level led to another consequence. Some evidence wasn't immediately forwarded to the forensics department, but was only stored in the warehouse pending analysis. By the time someone reviewed it again, a few pieces of evidence had gotten mixed in with other files, making it harder to trace their origin. Small samples like soil fragments, fabric fibers, and even part of the camera footage were overwritten when the storage drive wasn't backed up on schedule. This didn't happen intentionally, but due to a lack of cross-checking procedures, the result was that the opportunity to reconstruct the events of the night Athena disappeared was significantly narrowed. Time passed, and the key members of the original investigative team were gradually reassigned to other cases. Some retired, some transferred to different divisions in the district. The shift in personnel caused the overall knowledge and initial intuition about the case to become fragmented. Personal notes went untracked, unfinished investigative leads were closed for lack of follow-up. In the final review meetings, Athena's case was marked no progress. The interrogation transcripts, crime scene photos, and remaining evidence were boxed up, sealed, and moved to storage room number 4. Athena's family continued contacting the investigating agency, sending emails, making calls, even showing up in person at the district office to ask about progress. Each time, they received the same response: no new information. Still, every one of those contacts was logged in the file, showing the family's persistence in seeking the truth. The officers taking the calls could clearly sense the mix of hope and exhaustion in the voices of people waiting for answers they didn't know when they'd get. The family's letters and follow-up notes requesting updates sat alone in the file folder, like evidence of a long drawn-out wait. When the case reached 2006, the District Review Board updated all unresolved missing persons cases. Athena Morelli was added to the cold case category. By definition, no viable investigative leads, no new evidence, no progress for more than a year. A form was filled out, marking the transfer to long-term archive status. The evidence box was placed on an old wooden shelf in the dedicated storage room, among hundreds of other cases that had once started with urgency, but were also set aside for lack of leads. There was no special meeting for the case, no in-depth discussion about changing investigative directions. It quietly slipped into hibernation, like so many other dead-end cases. New officers in the Criminal Investigations Division, when assigned to do preliminary file reviews, noted that the Athena case lacked strong enough data to reopen at that point. No one disputed the seriousness of the disappearance, but the lack of any change in information meant they couldn't move forward. The case was tagged temporarily closed due to no viable leads. The storage room still held the same dim yellow lighting and rows of metal file cabinets, stretching out, where Athena's case sat among countless other unresolved stories. No one monitored it daily anymore. No strategy meetings took place. Only the label Cold Case 2006 was added to the file cover, marking the moment the case no longer flowed in the active investigation stream, yet it remained an open file, waiting for a new opportunity that might one day shift the entire perspective in the future. When Athena's file was placed into storage, some internal plant documents were also sent to the investigating agency to supplement the 2004 file. However, during later reviews of the storage boxes in the following years, a young officer from the records department discovered a misplaced report tucked between unrelated paperwork. The content of this report recorded that a large steam pressure device from the maintenance team had been marked as missing exactly on the night Athena left the plant for the last time. This was a heavy, expensive piece of equipment under strict management, but at the time no one really investigated because the report was logged as an inventory error. No one cross-checked the timing of the device's disappearance with the timing of Athena's disappearance, allowing this important detail to slip away in the silence of administrative procedures. In addition, when opening the file box containing internal notes, a shift report from warehouse number 3 was found with a brief description that an irregular operation had occurred at the end of the late shift. The handwritten note mentioned that someone had opened the restricted supply cabinet without an approval code, causing an internal alert light to flash for a few seconds before going out. The timing of the alert activation coincided with the period when Athena entered that area. If the report had received proper attention in 2004, it could have served as grounds for closer scrutiny of the 3 employees present near the warehouse. But at the time, the report was considered a minor operational error and wasn't forwarded to the investigative team, so it remained quietly in the administrative file instead of entering the case file. While re-interviewing people who had worked at the plant, a former employee who had been transferred to another facility said something that caught the officer's attention. Something happened that night, but no one mentions it anymore. He didn't provide specific details, saying he wasn't present at the exact moment and couldn't confirm anything. However, the way he referred to the unusual atmosphere of that late shift prompted the review team to add another note to the file. This person said that after the night Athena disappeared, there were small scattered conversations inside the plant that quickly went quiet whenever someone new entered the room. He described the feeling as if everyone was trying to avoid mentioning something they all knew but didn't want to say out loud. When reviewing the 2004 camera reports, the review group noticed something noteworthy. The report stated that the camera pointed at warehouse number 3 had been found with a slight angle shift. The repair team representative noted that it could be due to vibration or a faulty mount. The investigator responsible for the cameras at the time didn't look deeper, believing that the plant had many strongly vibrating pieces of equipment and a minor angle shift wasn't serious. However, when placed alongside the fact that Athena disappeared right in the newly created blind spot, this oversight made the context of that night harder to grasp. The angle shift was only a few degrees, but it was enough to remove the warehouse door area from direct view. Another suspicious element emerged when the review team discovered that the internal log for warehouse number 3 was missing 2 minutes of data. This gap fell exactly during the phase when Athena entered the hallway leading to the warehouse. Other logs recording door open, close times, badge swipe times, temperature status, all had continuous timelines. Only the warehouse number 3 log showed a dead zone. The system at the time had no alert for data loss, allowing the interruption to pass unnoticed. The technical employee responsible for the system said secondary data loss errors could occur if the server was overloaded, but there were no records proving overload conditions on the day Athena disappeared. When all these documents were laid out on the table, the review team felt that the 2004 file had many details that were overlooked or undervalued. A missing steam pressure device that no one followed up on. An unauthorized alert in warehouse number 3 that wasn't escalated to the investigative department. A vague comment from a former employee that something happened that night. A camera angle shift, dismissed as a routine technical fault. 2 minutes of internal log data gone missing. Each individual detail could be a coincidence or an administrative error, but their simultaneous presence raised a major question about the transparency of the warehouse area during the night shift. Reviewing the old files didn't produce immediate answers, but it revealed that the complexity of the night Athena disappeared was far greater than what the initial file reflected. These details showed that warehouse number 3 did not operate according to normal procedures at the time Athena was present there, and at the same time there were multiple points suggesting concealment or manipulation had occurred on the night of the disappearance. When the investigating agency began digitizing old files to synchronize the statewide system, Athena's case was placed in the group of files requiring image rescanning due to the extremely poor camera quality from 2004. During this process, a new AI-based gate analysis software that had just been approved for trial use was applied to the blurry frames previously considered useless. The shadowy figure appearing in the hallway near warehouse number 3, which had only been viewed as a moving dark patch, was broken down by the system into skeletal joint points based on human body movement patterns. Initial results showed an 82% match with Elliot Marsh's gait, based on the plant's personnel data from 2004. The software proceeded to match key movements: right shoulder deviation, a slightly longer stride on the left leg, and a subtle lean when changing direction. These characteristics were documented in Elliott's worker health file before he left the plant a few months after Athena's disappearance. The high degree of match prompted the review team to re-examine Elliott's entire statement in the file. He had insisted he was in the office and did not step into the hallway during the period when Athena vanished. However, if that blurry figure was indeed him, it would mean Elliott had not been truthful about his location. Another issue arose when checking the time clock system and internal reports. The record showed Elliott present in the office toward the end of the shift, consistent with the data sequence. This made the AI match harder to evaluate, because it couldn't determine whether Elliott had left the office for a few minutes and returned. His office had no dedicated camera to record entry and exit movements, leaving his internal alibi still vague. Former co-workers said Elliott often moved around more than the record showed, with a habit of personally checking warehouse rows in place of the monitoring staff. This allowed for the possibility that he was near warehouse number 3, without it being logged in the time clock records. The investigative team attempted a 3D simulation of the hallway where Athena was last seen. Based on actual dimensions, camera position and objects placed in the area, the simulation showed that Athena would have had difficulty disappearing from view without an obstruction or someone blocking her path. In the model, the hallway had only 2 points where visibility could be briefly lost: the turn into warehouse number 3, and a spot right behind the crate storage shelves. This blind spot was determined to be wide enough to conceal another person standing there. This led the simulation team to note that Athena being intercepted at the turn area was the scenario most consistent with the spatial data. While cross-referencing files, the review team realized that the events on the night Athena disappeared were more closely tied to equipment operations than to personal conflicts. The unauthorized alert in warehouse number 3, the missing steam pressure device, the nylon fiber not matching QC materials, and the report of unauthorized supply cabinet access all fell within the scope of technical work. This led analysts to conclude that the incident might be connected to internal procedural violations in equipment handling or operations rather than direct interpersonal conflict between employees. Signs related to the coordination of internal vehicle 34 and the blurry appearance of a figure in the hallway also shifted the investigative focus from personal scenarios to irregular activities in warehouse operations during the night shift. When the initial AI findings were forwarded to the Texas Rangers, Athena's file was moved into a higher priority reevaluation group. The Rangers requested review of all old evidence, including data files previously overlooked due to the misassessment of severity in 2004. Documents related to the camera angle shift, the 2-minute log gap report, and notes on the missing steam pressure device were grouped together for linkage analysis. Applying new technology exposed hazy points in the old file that had previously gone unnoticed. During the re-examination of evidence compatibility, the Rangers requested rescanning of the drag marks on the concrete floor using surface reconstruction software. The 3D image of the drag marks showed the pulling direction aligned perfectly with the secondary exit path leading out the back of the plant, where a small road led down to Cottonwood Creek. The data didn't prove anything conclusively, but it aligned with the spatial simulation conclusion that Athena could not have left the hallway via the main route on her own. The AI analysis results were not intended to identify a perpetrator, but they pulled the case out of stagnation by generating new questions. These questions were added to the file as a basis for expanding additional lines of inquiry related to procedural violations in operations, equipment coordination, non-transparent personnel presence, and unusual movements of internal vehicles on the night Athena disappeared. During the full audit of the district's evidence storage warehouse to review administrative errors, warehouse staff discovered an old cardboard box buried deep in the rear shelving row, where files from the early 2000s were kept. The label on the box bore the case number for a minor theft at a convenience store, but the sequential file number printed on the box edge didn't match the sealed position in the system. When the box was opened for verification, the audit team realized the evidence inside had absolutely no connection to the theft listed on the label. An immediate preliminary report was drafted on the spot, clearly noting the possibility that the evidence box had been mislabeled from the initial intake date. Upon closer inspection of the contents, the staff recognized several items bearing the case code for the Athena matter from 2004. This prompted them to immediately isolate the cardboard box from the others and transfer it to the verification department. When the first sealed evidence bag was opened, they found a thin charcoal-colored women's jacket, identified as the one Athena was wearing on the night she left the plant. The fabric on the left shoulder panel and hem was coated with a layer of dried soil. This soil sample didn't resemble the usual cement dust that clung to employees' clothing in the industrial area. It was darker in color and had a finer grain texture. The forensics team was notified immediately to conduct a comparison of the soil. In another sealed bag inside the box was a mini cassette audio tape. The tape was heavily degraded and had never been played during the 2004 investigation phase because the mislabeled evidence box wasn't included in the analysis roster. The label on the cassette bore only 3 faint handwritten words, "Hall mic." This suggested it had been removed from an ambient recording microphone or one attached to a maintenance device, but no one knew why it appeared alongside Athena's evidence. The audit staff noted that operating an old tape player might be difficult, but the cassette still needed to be preserved intact for the audio analysis team to examine. Another evidence bag contained 2 thin nylon fibers and a small amount of residual soil at the bottom of the bag. The nylon fibers were compared to the technical binding cord used by the maintenance team, identical to the sample collected at the scene near the broken clipboard. The soil sample in the bag had a color relatively similar to the soil taken from the jacket, and matched the soil previously recorded on the QC papers found near the plant fence. This indicated that the samples shared the same origin, but they had never been sent for analysis before because the containing box was mislabeled and misplaced for many years. When warehouse staff checked the old seal codes, they discovered that the intake log from the night in 2004 had recorded the wrong shelf slot number, causing the evidence box to be placed in the incorrect section. The person responsible for intake at that time no longer worked at the agency and couldn't be asked to explain the mix-up. The intake record only had a signature confirming evidence receipt, but no detailed duplicate describing the box contents, making verification difficult. The audit team drafted a report of serious administrative error and recommended checking all boxes from the same period to ensure no similar mistakes remained. The discovery of Athena's jacket held particular significance for forensics because previously there had been no item proving Athena had ever come into contact with soil outside the plant. In preliminary analysis, the soil layer clinging to the jacket showed signs of clay-mixed earth similar to the soil in the Cottonwood Creek area. The concentration of soil on the left shoulder panel suggested the jacket had touched the ground in an involuntary position, because if Athena had sat or lain down on the ground voluntarily under normal conditions, the soil adhesion wouldn't have focused so heavily on the shoulder area. The audio cassette tape, even though it couldn't yet be played clearly, also became a point of special concern, because it was sealed together with the jacket and soil samples, indicating the cassette had likely been collected from an area connected to Athena but got lost during intake. A technical specialist from the audio department speculated that the tape might have captured ambient sounds from the warehouse area if a microphone had been placed near the hallway leading to warehouse number 3. However, all hypotheses had to wait until the tape player could be restored. When the forensics team received the nylon fibers and soil samples from the mislabeled box, they placed the new samples next to the evidence collected in 2004. The two groups of evidence matched almost perfectly: same type of nylon, same soil properties, same clay dust form. This proved that the evidence in the lost box belonged to the same area where Athena was last seen. This information was especially important to forensics because it allowed them to reconnect part of the event chain that had previously been broken due to missing comparative samples. The biggest issue recorded in the 2024 audit report wasn't the evidence itself, but the 2004 intake system. Errors in labeling, coding, and system entry caused the evidence box to be placed in the wrong location for nearly 20 years. This wasn't an intentional act but stemmed from outdated management procedures, lack of cross-verification, and absence of periodic follow-up. Although no specific individual could be held accountable, this error directly impacted the ability to reconstruct the case context. When the samples were laid out on the analysis table, both forensics and audit staff realized that these seemingly lost pieces of evidence could change the understanding of what happened on the night Athena disappeared. No conclusions were drawn immediately, but the recovery of the mislabeled evidence box opened up a portion of data that had been forgotten for 2 decades, providing additional grounds for subsequent analysis steps that had never existed in the file before. The mini cassette tape found in the mislabeled evidence box was immediately transferred to the district's audio analysis department. The old tape player had to be cleaned multiple times before the cassette could run stably. When the audio was first played, there was only thick white noise mixed with a few distorted, indistinguishable sounds. This forced the analysis team to use a new analog noise reduction AI software, a tool recently added to recover low-quality old recordings. The software began filtering layer by layer, separating the background noise, mostly industrial fan hum and electrical interference, gradually revealing the faint sounds buried deep in the recording. After many hours of processing, the first clear sounds emerged. A female voice came through, very brief, slightly tense, not shouting but with urgency in the breathing rhythm. The analysis team zoomed in on the segment and compared it to voice samples from Athena's 2003 internal training videos. The high match rate allowed them to conclude that the female voice on the tape was very likely Athena's. The sentence gradually became clearer with each noise reduction layer. "Don't move that outside." The tone of this statement carried neither pleading nor heavy fear. It sounded like the natural reaction of someone spotting improper behavior in the work environment. An audio technician noted that this sentence appeared to have been spoken at a moment when Athena still had some control over the situation. Right after Athena's line, a male voice appeared. The voice was low, short, and decisive. The software isolated the wind and metal background noise to highlight the reply, "We're not stopping now." This line came through almost free of interference, indicating the speaker was closer to the microphone than Athena. The male voice wasn't loud, but it carried a firm oppositional intensity. When compared to personnel file recordings, the analysis team noted several similarities with the voices of some male employees on the shift, but there wasn't enough data for a precise identification. Following the man's response, the recording captured a sharp metallic impact against a hard surface. Frequency analysis showed this sound matched the tipping or pushing of a small steam pressure device, a type commonly used by the maintenance team, with a sturdy metal casing and heavy bass. The sound had a slight lingering ring, consistent with the wide space and solid metal walls characteristic of warehouse number 3. The analysis team matched the acoustic properties to the warehouse layout diagram, determining that the impact echoed from a distance of a few meters from the microphone. The next sound in the tape was a brief chaotic burst, something scraping against the floor, followed by a heavy truncated sliding noise. When cross-referencing amplitude patterns, the analysis team stated that this resembled an abrupt collision signal, with no signs of preparation or warning. Notably, there was no prolonged cry for help from Athena anywhere in the recording. The silence after the metallic impact drew attention from many in the analysis group, because if a conflict had occurred, it happened very quickly, giving Athena no time to react or call out. Some specialists noted that this fit scenarios of sudden industrial encounters where a person blocked in their path doesn't immediately recognize the level of danger. When acoustic spatial analysis software was applied, the data showed that the reverb of both voices matched a wide cold space with metal surfaces and few sound-absorbing obstacles. This characteristic aligned more closely with warehouse number 3 than any other area in the plant. The hallway lacked that kind of echo, while the QC area had more soft surfaces that dampened reverberation. This match led the analysis team to note that the recording was highly likely captured inside or very near warehouse number 3. During a meticulous review of every segment, technicians detected several other faint background sounds: fabric brushing against something hard, light foot scuffing on concrete, and a brief rush of air being forced quickly. These sounds were small but appeared precisely in the interval between the two spoken lines, indicating rapid movement between two people interacting in a confined space. Though individual actions couldn't be pinpointed exactly, the acoustic characteristics suggested some form of restraint or push occurring, consistent with the floor marks and nylon evidence recovered from the scene. When the audio recording was cross-referenced with other evidence in the file, technicians concluded that the exchange on the tape wasn't a random conversation. Athena's statement indicated she was reacting to behavior involving moving something out of a restricted area. The man's reply carried a tone of refusal to stop, as if proceeding with an action Athena wanted to halt. Overall, the recording, from voice characteristics to reverb and impact sounds, painted a picture of an unexpected encounter in which Athena inadvertently witnessed improper procedural handling. The recording was transcribed into text, accompanied by frequency charts and spatial analysis tables, then added to the file as one of the few surviving audio pieces of evidence from the night Athena disappeared. The cassette, once forgotten in the mislabeled evidence box, was now examined from a new angle, containing a sequence of sounds that hinted at a sudden moment that occurred in warehouse number 3, along with rapid movements that left almost no spoken words beyond the two brief sentences rising through the noise. After completing the audio decoding, the forensics team moved on to in-depth analysis of the physical evidence in the mislabeled box, especially the soil samples clinging to Athena's jacket and the nylon fibers recovered. The first soil sample, separated from the shoulder area of the jacket, was magnified under an optical microscope. The soil particles were brownish-gray, fine, but mixed with small clay grains, completely different from the plant's cement dust layer. When mineral composition was matched against the regional geological map, the results showed the sample aligned with soil from the Cottonwood Creek South Bank area, a low-lying zone, with characteristic clay layers that had undergone structural changes during the early rainy months of the year. The presence of soil from this area on Athena's jacket was noteworthy, because the South Bank zone lay farther out than the areas searched back in 2004, and wasn't within the normal travel radius of plant employees. The soil adhering to the jacket hem was analyzed separately. The particles were nearly identical to the Cottonwood Creek sample, differing only in compaction level. This suggested the hem had struck the ground surface forcefully, possibly due to a dragging or lowering posture while Athena was not in control. One technician noted that the degree of soil compaction into the fabric indicated a fairly sudden pressing force, unlike the pattern from someone voluntarily sitting or kneeling under natural conditions. The higher soil density on one side of the jacket also suggested an asymmetrical movement direction, consistent with the body being pulled at an angle. Alongside the soil samples, the forensics team closely examined the newly recovered nylon fibers in the evidence box. The fiber type, twist pattern, and polymer composition all matched the technical cord used to secure steam pressure equipment, the only type handled exclusively by the maintenance team. The QC department did not use this cord, and there was no legitimate work reason for it to appear on Athena's clipboard, or mixed with evidence linked to her jacket. This was a key piece of data, because it narrowed the pool of individuals who could have accessed that cord during the night shift in 2004. Another point of interest was the condition of the nylon fiber tear. Under an electron microscope, the nylon fiber surface didn't break along the typical curved wear pattern from equipment abrasion. Instead, it showed jagged tearing at a sharp pull angle, suggesting the cord had been yanked or snapped under sudden forceful impact. The degree of deformation in the nylon indicated it had endured a downward or lateral pulling force, exceeding normal technical operations. This led the specialists to conclude that the nylon didn't snap during routine equipment handling, but in a situation involving resistance or restraint. When the nylon was placed next to Athena's jacket for comparison, the tear pattern and tiny fiber streaks on the shoulder fabric shared nearly identical characteristics with the pulled nylon position. A thin streak ran along the left shoulder down the sleeve, showing something had contacted and then slid forcefully, leaving a small but distinct abrasion visible under backlighting. A kinematics technician simulated the interaction between body and dragged object. The simulation indicated that if a person was restrained by nylon cord on the left side, and then pulled forward, the sliding path would follow a direction very similar to the one on Athena's jacket. Based on impact force measurements previously recorded in industrial accident files, the forensics team confirmed that the abrasion marks on the jacket did not match typical workplace accidents, such as catching on equipment hooks or ordinary slips. The angle of the abrasion and the direction of the torn nylon pointed to the possibility that Athena had been subjected to mechanical force from another person. There was no way to produce such abrasion if she had tried to free herself from a stationary device, because the nylon tear pattern showed opposing pulling forces from two directions. To reinforce this, forensics placed the jacket and nylon fibers in a motion analysis chamber. Vector force measurements from the long sliding streak on the jacket suggested Athena's body moved along a drag trajectory, not self-directed walking. The smear angle on the jacket, 17 degrees relative to the body axis, was characteristic of lateral dragging rather than voluntary forward or backward movement. The pattern of soil adhesion on the jacket also concentrated in a way consistent with someone being pulled across damp ground, rather than a person falling and then standing up on their own. The soil and nylon analysis was entered into the file as a chain of forensic conclusions, stating that Athena could not have left the plant premises voluntarily. The fact that her clothing carried soil from Cottonwood Creek South Bank, an area never searched before, combined with the forcefully pulled nylon, proved she had been moved from the area in an involuntary state. These results were forwarded to the legal team and the Texas Rangers per protocol, marking a shift in the perception of Athena's disappearance from mere suspicion of voluntary absence to a potential connection with procedural violations in operations and human-generated mechanical force on the night she vanished. When the forensic results on the soil, nylon and drag marks on the jacket were placed alongside the newly decoded audio recording, the analysts began reconstructing the operational context of the night shift in 2004 in warehouse number 3. According to internal documents, the plant at that time was processing a batch of defective goods related to steam pressure equipment. A cross-verification procedure had been activated, requiring the QC department to re-inspect all equipment used in the production chain. Athena, in her quality control role, frequently conducted surprise checks on reported batches and equipment at risk of failing standards. This made her move to the warehouse area while the night shift crew was preparing to relocate equipment, a scenario consistent with her normal duties. In the operations log, a medium-sized steam pressure device was recorded as having lost control due to a faulty pressure gauge, leading it to be tagged "removed from line for repair." This equipment fell under the maintenance team's responsibility and had no connection to personal finances or any private benefit. However, allowing an equipment failure during a shift could be viewed as a serious procedural violation, especially since the plant had recently undergone a statewide inspection. The night shift supervisors at the time were noted as having shown concern about potential collective accountability if the faulty device was reported up the system. In the decoded audio recording, Athena's statement "don't move that outside" indicated she recognized the movement of the equipment was not following regulations. The male voice replying, "We're not stopping now," reinforced the assessment that someone in the warehouse was carrying out an act of concealment. This aligned with a note in the internal report: someone had opened the restricted supply cabinet without an approval code. The steam pressure device may have been removed from the warehouse area through an unregistered method to avoid entry into the management system. When Athena entered, it's possible she didn't fully grasp the severity of the situation, but still attempted to intervene, because her job required her to uphold proper procedures. This intervention left the night shift crew flustered, because they hadn't yet agreed on how to handle it. The forcefully pulled nylon, the abrasion marks on Athena's jacket consistent with being dragged sideways, and the metallic impact sound on the tape suggested the steam pressure device had been pushed or struck hard during the scuffle. These pieces of data indicated that Athena had tried to approach the device to inspect or stop its movement when she was restrained by mechanical force from someone in the group, lost balance, and sustained serious injury. There was no evidence suggesting anyone intentionally killed Athena. The forensic and audio data both showed the sequence unfolded very quickly, with no prolonged cries for help or signs of extended assault. The conflict occurred in a moment, arising from a group of employees attempting to correct a technical error by moving the equipment out of the warehouse instead of reporting it officially. However, under Texas law, if a dangerous or unlawful act leads to another person's death, even without initial intent, those involved can still be charged with felony murder. Athena's severe injury during the scuffle fell squarely within this framework. After Athena fell and lost the ability to resist, the night shift crew faced a situation they were completely unprepared for. The 2-minute gap in the internal log occurred precisely at this point, creating a void that forensics couldn't fill with second-by-second sequence, but the evidence showed chaos unfolded over a short period. The nylon snapped under pull, QC papers scattered on the floor, the clipboard broken, all consistent with an uncontrolled incident. When the group realized Athena's condition, fear of investigation and job loss may have driven them to attempt to remove evidence, rather than call for emergency help. Internal Vehicle 34, which had no driver log, became the only feasible means of quick transport in that situation. The vehicle's departure from the lot and appearance near Cottonwood Creek per the 2004 cell tower data suggested the route may have been used to move Athena's body to a hard-to-detect location before shift change. The drag marks and Cottonwood Creek soil on Athena's jacket supported the conclusion that her body had been transported out of the plant premises using this vehicle. There was no financial motive, no personal grudge or jealousy. Everything in the file pointed to a motive rooted in fear of technical procedural violation, a mistake that could trigger a full-line re-inspection, affecting multiple departments, and even the plant's contracts. The night shift crew may have tried to cover the error before reporting the shift, but Athena's unexpected intervention disrupted the plan and led to unintended consequences. The forensic audio and internal data analysis allowed the reconstruction that the motive in the case did not stem from personal malice, but from a procedural violation and fear of disciplinary action, resulting in a chain of unintentional actions with severe consequences. When the investigative team reviewed all data related to the plant's internal vehicles, they accessed the 2004 cell tower logs to look for signs of Vehicle 34. Although internal vehicles back then didn't use modern GPS, the vehicle still had a simple single-line signal transmitter that allowed relative position tracking when it passed through areas near the town's cell towers. The data had previously been considered unreliable due to low accuracy, but when forensics combined it with the terrain map and plant access roads, the signal points turned out to be unexpectedly useful. The signal sequence showed Vehicle 34 leaving the plant and taking about 7 minutes to move south. The travel speed reflected in the data fell between 15 and 25 miles per hour, consistent with the speed of an internal vehicle driven on side roads. The final stopping coordinates were not on the main road, but offset into the low-lying area near Cottonwood Creek, the same area where investigators had previously found Athena's car. The signal point remained fixed for a few minutes before disappearing from the map, consistent with the vehicle stopping in a zone with weak signal reflection. A notable point was that no driver log existed for Vehicle 34 during that time frame. Normally, every time a vehicle left the lot, it required a signature in the logbook or badge swipe to authenticate the user. The remaining data was completely blank. This indicated the vehicle had been used without authorization, or the driver deliberately avoided recording it. When cross-referencing the time Athena was last seen on camera with the moment Vehicle 34 left the plant, the investigative team noticed a match within a few minutes. This window fell between the creation of the camera blind spot and the 2-minute gap in the internal log system. The analysts re-examined the exterior of Vehicle 34. A small amount of soil dust clinging to the passenger side door sill was sampled. The results showed the soil layer matched completely with samples from Cottonwood Creek South Bank. This wasn't unusual if the vehicle had traveled through the Cottonwood Creek area in previous years. However, the particularly dark color and mineral-rich nature of South Bank soil wasn't common in the other surrounding land around the plant. Its appearance precisely on the vehicle that left the plant on the night Athena disappeared made the soil sample carry greater forensic value. Inside the cabin of Vehicle 34, forensics found two thin nylon fibers caught in the rear seat crevice. Under the microscope, the nylon fibers had characteristics identical to the cord used to secure steam pressure equipment, the same type recovered at the scene in warehouse number 3 and from the mislabeled evidence box. This was a highly significant detail because internal vehicles had no reason to contain this type of nylon unless a steam pressure device had been placed in or come into contact with the cabin. This technical binding cord wasn't associated with the goods transport department, and internal vehicles typically only carried light supply packages or maintenance personnel. The analysis team noted that the combination of Cottonwood Creek soil on Athena's jacket, matching soil on Vehicle 34, and nylon fibers in the cabin indicated a direct link between Athena, the steam pressure equipment, and activity leaving the plant during the disappearance window. When the map and cell tower data were laid out on the table, the analysts reconstructed Vehicle 34's route. The vehicle followed the internal road out the south auxiliary gate, turned onto a small path along the forest edge, then stopped near the descent to Cottonwood Creek. This was a route rarely used because it wasn't part of the main operational flow. A technician reconstructed Vehicle 34's movement by inputting the speed and stop time data. The results showed a gap of several minutes sufficient for two people to unload a heavy object from the cabin. This was noted in the file because the weight of the steam pressure equipment matched the load an internal vehicle could carry. No camera footage captured the vehicle that night, consistent with the user being familiar with camera positions and choosing an exit path outside recording angles. In an internal meeting, forensics presented the analysis that Vehicle 34 was the only vehicle showing movement patterns consistent with the time of Athena's disappearance and carrying evidence matching the scene. The vehicle had no driver log. The cabin contained nylon of the same type used to secure steam pressure equipment, and the door sill had Cottonwood Creek soil. These data points suggested the vehicle may have been used to transport something from the warehouse area to the southern forested zone. The fact that it stopped exactly where the soil sample from Athena's jacket appeared reinforced the possibility that it carried part or all of the evidence related to her. When retracing Vehicle 34's route in reverse from Cottonwood Creek back to the plant, the analysis team observed that the short but discrete path took only a few minutes to drive, if the operator knew the terrain well. No guard post recorded the license plate or any unusual movement. The small road was wide enough for an internal vehicle and typically had no traffic at night. Vehicle 34's presence in this signal zone indicated a journey that took place during the time when all night shift personnel claimed they were at their workstations, so no one noticed the vehicle leaving the plant. The combination of cell tower data, soil and nylon evidence, and the absence of a driver log made Vehicle 34 the central focus in reconstructing the night Athena disappeared. These details were compiled into the file to support a survey of the Cottonwood Creek location, where soil samples from the jacket and Vehicle 34 cabin both matched. Cottonwood Creek South Bank was designated as a priority survey zone after soil evidence and cell tower data confirmed that Vehicle 34 had stopped there. The terrain in the area featured multiple layers of alluvial soil, low brush, and damp, hard-to-access patches. The forensic survey team brought ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and divided into small groups to scan in a grid pattern. GPR scanned the ground surface with electromagnetic pulses, continuously generating reflection graphs that displayed anomalous objects beneath the soil. The wavy patterns appearing on the screen were analyzed segment by technicians to identify spots requiring excavation. When scanning reached about 200 meters south of the access path, the GPR recorded an oval-shaped anomaly lying roughly half a meter below the surface. This anomaly had a different reflection density from the surrounding soil layers, forming a slightly broken outline, a common sign of decomposing organic material. The technical team marked the location with reflective stakes and expanded the scan radius by a few more meters to check the extent of the reflective zone. The graph showed dimensions comparable to a curled human body, along with several small objects whose structure wasn't fully consistent with the soil. Manual excavation began immediately after the GPR signal. They started by clearing dry leaves and surface soil, then used small trowels to avoid damaging anything underneath. The thick, musty smell of long-buried earth rose as the second soil layer was scraped aside. A dark fabric fragment appeared first, clinging tightly to the soil and frayed into threads. The color and texture matched the type of jacket Athena had been wearing. When they dug a few more centimeters deeper, the digging team saw pale white bone structure exposed, the slender curved shape of an upper arm bone consistent with an adult female. The discovery of human bone prompted immediate expansion of the excavation area and application of preservation protocols. Forensic technicians cordoned off the zone, photographing each soil layer to record the relative positions of bones before collection. The first group to uncover saw the skull fragment, no longer intact, with two round indentations on the left side and rear. When the skull was placed in a preservation tray, forensics preliminarily noted these as trauma from heavy blunt force impact to the cranium, with the indentation shape corresponding to the edge size of a medium steam pressure device, the type recorded as involved in the incident in warehouse number 3. In the soil layer near the shoulder bones, technicians recovered a small object in the form of a partially peeled silver decal. The intact portion was sufficient to make out faint characters forming the number 34. This decal had the reflective material characteristic of the plant's internal vehicle marking system. Forensics placed the decal fragment in a sample container, noting that it was found in the same soil layer as the clothing and bones, indicating direct contact between Athena's body and internal vehicle 34 during transport. A remaining portion of trouser fabric retained double-stitch side seams, the stitching style supplied by the plant for QC employees in 2004. Though most of the fabric had decomposed, the thread pattern and dark blue dye remained identifiable. Nearby, a metal button from a pocket bore the plant logo, and detail clearly described in the clothing description Athena's family provided to investigators on the night she went missing. Forensics continued mapping the skeletal position, legs slightly curled, left arm close to the torso, right arm angled slightly downward. This posture suggested the body had been placed rather than fallen freely. Higher soil compaction density on the back indicated gravity acting in a supine position. Soil samples around the remains showed no signs of multiple digging episodes. The body appeared to have been placed into a natural depression or pre-existing low spot, and then covered with a thin soil layer. Analysis of the skull became the main focus. The two round indentations on the cranium were measured for diameter. The results matched the contact surface area of the base of the missing steam pressure device from the 2004 inventory log. The indentations weren't sharp like those from pointed objects, but showed compression, consistent with impact when the device was forcefully pushed against the head of someone standing nearby. The fractured portions of the skull indicated heavy and sudden force, distinct from typical industrial physical accidents. The position of the neck bones and shoulder fragments showed no signs of excessive twisting or pulling fractures, supporting the assessment that the fatal trauma primarily came from cranial impact rather than the body being crushed or dragged afterward. However, soil adhesion on the jacket and sliding streaks on the fabric indicated Athena had been dragged some distance before being loaded onto the transport vehicle. In the soil layer directly beneath the leg bones, the digging team discovered several characteristic clay particles compressed into a thin layer, consistent with the weight pattern of a body placed in a depression and subjected to pressure from the overlying soil cover. The uniformity of the covering soil layer indicated the burial location had remained undisturbed from the initial time, with no signs of relocation or redigging. When compiling the evidence at the Cottonwood Creek scene, from human bones, fabric fragments, vehicle decal, to soil characteristics, forensics determined that the remains belonged to Athena and that her body had sustained heavy blunt force impact before being moved out of the plant. The remaining skeletal portions were carefully collected, individually numbered, and transferred to the forensics lab for further detailed analysis. The discovery area was marked for expanded survey, giving the investigative team a basis to reconstruct the complete body transport route from warehouse number 3 to Cottonwood Creek. After the remains were confirmed and new evidence was added, the police conducted re-interviews with each night shift employee from 2004, this time armed with full forensic proof. Elliot Marsh was called in first. On the table were the AI gate analysis printout, the hallway simulation map, forensic soil results, nylon findings, and even the vehicle 34 decal fragment found in the soil layer near Athena's remains. These pieces of data put Elliot in a state where he could no longer stay calm. He faced each question, trying to stick to his original statement, but the match between the figure in the camera, the timing of his absence from the office, and the audio analysis results made his story untenable. When confronted with the recording containing the line, "We're not stopping now," Elliot avoided looking at the playback device. Questions about who was present in warehouse number 3 at that moment left him flustered, and after hours of silence, Elliot was forced to shift his stance. Ultimately, he stated that the person who directly restrained and pulled Athena was Samuel Drake. Elliot described Samuel as the one standing closest to the steam pressure device when Athena appeared at the warehouse door. When Athena reacted, Samuel tried to push her back from the storage area, leading to a violent scuffle. Elliot admitted he was only a few steps away and didn't intervene in time. Elliot claimed that Victor Hale was the one who drove vehicle 34 to transport the body out of the plant premises. He described Victor as someone familiar with the forest route and knowledgeable about avoiding security cameras. However, Victor had died in 2010 in a traffic accident, making criminal accountability against him no longer possible. Still, the statement about Victor aligned with the cell tower data, the soil samples in the vehicle, and the decal found in the burial area, further reinforcing the route forensics had reconstructed. When asked why he didn't report the incident right away, Elliot said the situation unfolded too quickly, and then everything spiraled out of control. He admitted he was the one who adjusted the camera to create the blind spot and cleaned up the scene after the scuffle. This made him a participant in the cover-up, falling under conspiracy charges under Texas law, even though he wasn't the direct cause of the injury. Elliot said their initial intent was only to move the equipment outside to avoid inspection. They never imagined the incident would lead to such severe consequences. This matched the procedural violation motive forensics had already identified. The police then moved to question Samuel Drake. Upon hearing that Elliot had confessed, Samuel reacted by denying all accusations. He claimed Elliot was trying to shift blame to lessen his own involvement. Samuel insisted he never touched Athena and wasn't present in the warehouse at the time forensics pinpointed. However, each point in his statement was refuted when matched against the evidence. The industrial shoe print matched the type of boots issued to Samuel. The torn nylon fiber matched the equipment he was responsible for. The audio recording showed the male voice very close to the microphone, consistent with the position Samuel had claimed to be in. The drag marks on the concrete floor matched the weight of a person being pulled in the area he oversaw. Forensics also pointed out that the impact force on Athena's skull was compatible with the height and reach of someone handling the steam pressure device. Samuel continued to deny everything despite the mounting evidence against him. Throughout the lengthy interrogation, Samuel's attitude didn't change, but the contradictions between his words and the physical data tilted the file more heavily toward Elliot's account. In a direct confrontation between the two, Elliot stood by his statement that Samuel restrained and pulled Athena when she demanded they stop moving the equipment. Elliot described how Samuel reacted instinctively at that moment, wanting to protect the already started plan to relocate the device. Athena intervened with a firm statement, and that instant led to an action beyond what the group had anticipated. Samuel's denial without providing any reasonable alternative evidence led investigators to conclude that Elliot's statement, though self-serving to reduce his own liability, still aligned with the forensic facts. The torn nylon, sliding streaks on the jacket, Cottonwood Creek soil, and the Vehicle 34 decal found in the soil near the remains formed a web of data, proving the mechanism of body transport from the warehouse to the burial site. The police completed the cross-reference file and presented it to the district attorney's office to request an arrest warrant for Samuel Drake on charges of causing injury, resulting in death during the commission of a technical procedural violation. The details in Elliott's statement, combined with forensic evidence and cell tower data, clarified each person's role in the incident. Samuel was the one who directly restrained Athena, Elliott was the one who covered up and coordinated the scene, and Victor was the one who transported the body using Vehicle 34. The determination that the injury was not caused by personal conflict, but by fear of accountability in equipment operation procedures, was fully documented in the report. With sufficient elements from the statements and evidence, the police moved to the procedural step of preparing the arrest warrant for Samuel Drake. The arrest warrant was signed on a March morning after the district attorney finalized the complete cross-reference file of forensics, statements, and technical timeline. The Williamson County Special Task Force, in coordination with the Texas Rangers, arrived in Round Rock, where Samuel Drake was working for a small mechanical company. He stepped out of the shop as the morning shift had just started and saw 3 official vehicles blocking the front. The investigators approached, read the arrest warrant, charging felony murder along with 2 additional counts evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. Samuel did not resist, only raising both hands as the number 8 cuffs were tightened. His expression was unusually calm, but his eyes kept darting around as if searching to see whether anyone else was being taken away with him. In the interrogation room in Austin, Samuel maintained a guarded demeanor. He repeated that he was not present in warehouse number 3 at the time of the scuffle, and claimed Elliott had fabricated the story. However, every answer he gave was cross-checked against the evidence by the investigators. The torn nylon fiber matching the equipment he was responsible for, the industrial shoe print, the male voice in the recording, and his position confirmed through the incorrect badge swipe location during the shift in 2004. Samuel tried to maintain a consistent narrative, but the more he explained, the clearer the contradictions became. The blank gaps in his statement could not be filled with any reasonable data. Elliott Marsh was placed in the cooperating witness category. During the supplemental statement session, he signed a plea agreement for conspiracy to tamper with evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elliott described in detail each step that occurred in warehouse number 3, from the moment Athena appeared, Samuel's reaction, to the point where he adjusted the camera angle to obscure the hallway. This statement not only incriminated himself, but also aligned perfectly with the forensic indicators and motion diagram in the hallway. The prosecutor evaluated it as valuable because Elliott described technical specifications of the steam pressure device that only someone present would know. The prosecution team constructed a technical timeline beginning with the moment the camera created the blind spot, followed by the metallic sound in the recording, the position of the drag marks on the concrete floor, the torn nylon fiber, and the departure of Vehicle 34 from the plant. They used a 3D model of warehouse number 3 to demonstrate that the direction of movement matched the abrasion marks on Athena's jacket and the drag path of the Cottonwood Creek soil. This timeline reflected every minute of the night the incident occurred, not based on speculation but anchored to measured physical parameters: impact force on the skull, height of the striking object, drop point of the soil streak, and the route of the internal vehicle. During the third interrogation session, Samuel appeared fatigued but still maintained that he never touched Athena. When investigators presented the skull analysis, showing 2 round indentations, matching the edge size of the steam pressure device, and asked about his role in moving the equipment that night, Samuel remained silent for a long time. But that silence did not lead to a confession. He only replied that everything had been misinterpreted, and that he had no intention of harming anyone. Still, this denial was insufficient to refute the dense chain of evidence assembled on the table. In the pre-trial indictment hearing, the prosecution presented 3 main charges. 1. Felony murder, due to the technical procedural violation leading to Athena's death, even without intent to take life. 2. Evidence tampering, including cleaning the scene, adjusting the camera, and assisting in removing the body from the plant premises. 3. Abuse of a corpse, related to transporting and concealing the body in Cottonwood Creek. The charges were tightly packaged, thanks to a technically rich evidence system, soil characteristics, nylon specifications, drag marks, audio analysis, Vehicle 34 route. Forensics submitted a report hundreds of pages long, describing every force measurement, every motion vector, and every cross-referenced sample. When the prosecutor listed all the charges in full, Samuel kept a cold expression, but his back slightly hunched in the posture of someone who knew he was facing an inescapable situation. The investigators noticed his answers growing less confident. Each time he was asked about the improper handling of the steam pressure device, he evaded. When confronted with Elliot's statement about the moment Athena intervened, Samuel replied that he didn't remember exactly, even though he had previously described details differently from what forensics recorded. Meanwhile, Elliot was transferred to the district-level witness protection program to serve his testimony at trial. He fully cooperated in reconstructing the scene, using 3D simulation, and stated that all operations, adjusting the camera, leaving the warehouse door ajar by a few centimeters, and clearing paperwork, were carried out by him and Victor. These details matched the camera angle shift, and the position of the QC papers, blown by the wind toward the rear fence. The prosecutor held multiple review sessions with forensics to ensure the trial timeline contained no discrepancies, even by a few seconds. Every time marker was anchored to a specific piece of evidence, the metallic sound on the tape, the 2-minute log gap, the moment Vehicle 34 was picked up by the cell tower, and the moment Athena lost contact. All of it was built into a clear technical sequence, easy to present to a jury. When the legal procedures were completed, the file moved to the trial preparation phase. Samuel was held in Travis County Jail, awaiting his court date, on the 3 most serious charges, applicable to an industrial employee, causing a fatal outcome in the context of a procedural violation. Elliot remained in the cooperating defendant category, and the file related to Victor was closed, due to his death many years earlier. Samuel's arrest marked the moment the legal system formally advanced the Athena Morelli case into the criminal trial process, with charges grounded in clear technical evidence and statements consistent with the physical proof. The courtroom in Travis County was always packed every morning, especially on the days the prosecution presented the 3D reconstruction to the jury. Large screens on both sides displayed the simulation of every movement in warehouse number 3, based on forensic data. The adjusted camera angle, Athena's standing position, the steam pressure device placed on the pallet, and the drag trajectory shown with force vectors. The simulation accurately recreated the hallway dimensions, floor slope, walking speed, and distances between objects. The technical team explained that the model was built from actual measurements taken inside the plant, with no added fictional elements. Every time the system replayed the impact segment, the courtroom fell completely silent. The prosecution opened by placing the AI noise-reduced audio recording on the sound control desk. The 2 statements came through clearly, Athena's voice demanding they stop moving the equipment, and the male voice responding with firm determination. The metallic sound that followed was presented by forensics with a frequency spectrum, describing impact characteristics, matching the base of the steam pressure device. The jury was asked to note how the reverb in the warehouse number 3 space matched the characteristics of the recording, confirming the location and actions in that brief moment. When the prosecution moved to physical evidence, soil samples were placed in sealed trays and magnified under a microscope projected on the large screen. A geologist analyzed the minerals and clay particles that formed the distinctive fingerprint of the Cottonwood Creek South Bank area. Comparison with soil found in the cabin of Vehicle 34 and soil clinging to Athena's jacket showed clear consistency. Every small characteristic was presented meticulously to rule out random coincidence. The torn nylon fiber was brought forward next. A polymer expert described the structure and twist of the cord, matching the type used to secure steam pressure equipment. The uneven tear and deformation path indicated the nylon had been yanked hard during a restraint struggle. The prosecution asked the expert to explain the level of force required to produce such a tear. The answer came with clear numbers. The force far exceeded that of ordinary operational accidents, and was consistent with a hold and pull action between two people. A fragment of a decal bearing the number 34, found in the soil layer near the remains, was displayed next. The prosecution pointed out the adhering soil matching the alluvial layer, and proved the decal fragment belonged to internal vehicle 34, the only vehicle missing a driver log during the critical time window. The decal's position within the decomposed fabric of the jacket made it easy for the jury to visualize how the body transport had occurred. The camera angle restoration using image processing software was presented to prove the hallway blind spot was not natural, but the result of human intervention. The blurry figure in the video was analyzed by AI and shown to have an 82% gait match with Elliot Marsh, consistent with his own admission of adjusting the camera. The prosecution used this fact to reinforce the weight of Elliot's testimony as a cooperating witness. Elliot took the stand next. He looked at the jury, his voice low but clear. He recounted the moment Athena entered the warehouse, how she demanded the group stop pushing the equipment, and Samuel's reaction. Elliot described Samuel's hand grabbing Athena's shoulder in the moment of struggle, causing the device to strike hard. The jury listened intently, with no sound except the scratching of pens. The prosecution asked him to describe again the process of adjusting the camera and clearing scattered paperwork from the floor. Elliot admitted everything fully, stressing that every action afterward was to cover up the technical violation and not driven by personal motive. When the defense took their turn, they argued the incident could have been an accident, that the equipment was heavy, warehouse number 3 was cramped, and an unintentional impact could easily cause fatal injury. They contended Samuel acted in a state of panic, with no intent to harm. However, forensics countered by pointing out the force level sufficient to impact the skull, the round indentations, and the simulated force model could not occur if the device had merely tipped lightly. The medical examiner stated the injury showed 2 consecutive forces, consistent with a strong push and block reflex, rather than a simple accident. Elliot was directly confronted with Samuel when the defense tried to discredit him, but the consistency between his statement and the evidence weakened those rebuttals. The jury asked many questions about the sequence of scene cleanup, and forensics explained each step using data from floor abrasions and the broken clipboard. When the prosecution concluded its presentation, the entire body of evidence formed a seamless chain. Athena discovered the procedural violation, a scuffle ensued, the equipment struck causing injury, the body was removed from the plant using vehicle 34, and buried at Cottonwood Creek. This chain was not based on a single narrative, but on physical, audio, soil, nylon, and post-incident behavior analysis. During deliberations, the jury reviewed the 3D model and force analysis charts. They considered the defense's accident argument, but the forensic nature of the injury and the consistency of the evidence prevented them from agreeing with an unintentional scenario. When they returned to the courtroom, they delivered the verdict. Samuel Drake was guilty in the context of a procedural violation causing death, felony murder under Texas law. Reporters, former plant employees, and San Marcos residents followed the trial closely every day. The case became a symbol of the consequences of covering up technical violations in an industrial environment, prompting operating rooms across the state to re-examine procedures and reassess responsibilities for each shift. The courtroom in Travis County was packed every morning on the day the verdict was read. Sunlight from the windows behind the jury cast a heavy feeling across the faces of everyone present. Samuel Drake was brought in wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. Each step he took echoed evenly through the wide space, blending with the rustle of papers from the lawyers. When the judge entered, the entire room stood, then fell silent. The sentence was read slowly, clearly, each word falling like a stamp on the entire multi-year investigation journey. Samuel Drake received 40 years in prison for felony murder. The judge continued by adding 10 years for evidence tampering. The sentences were stacked, bringing the total term to 50 years in the Texas state prison system. Samuel stood motionless as the judgment was pronounced, his eyes showing little emotion but his cuffed hands clenching tighter, His silence lasted until the court officer led him away, without a single word of protest or plea for leniency. Elliot Marsh appeared that same afternoon for his separate sentencing. He was not tried in the same session as Samuel because he was a cooperating witness. When he stood at the podium, Elliot kept his head bowed throughout the reading of the sentence. His attorney entered the guilty plea on his behalf, and briefly outlined Elliot's assistance to the investigative team. But the judge emphasized that his role in adjusting the camera, cleaning the scene, and participating in the cover-up made his level of responsibility impossible to downplay. Elliot was sentenced to 18 years in prison for conspiracy and tampering with evidence. When he heard the number, he gave a slight nod, as though accepting everything he had caused during that chaotic night in 2004. Outside the courtroom, reporters stood in long lines, reporting continuously. Experts in the pharmaceutical and mechanical industries took a hard look at their own internal operating systems. The plant where Athena had worked implemented sweeping changes to workplace safety procedures, not just in warehousing, but across the entire production line. The Quality Control Department introduced a stricter new set of standards, applying a multi-layer reporting system to eliminate the possibility of a small group independently intervening in equipment without technical oversight. Employees began informally calling the new standard the Athena Protocol, a way to honor the woman who lost her life trying to uphold principles in an environment where people had grown accustomed to dodging accountability. Within Texas investigative agencies, the case became standard training material. The cold case unit incorporated the entire investigative process into an analysis model: how to cross-reference old cell tower data, how to recover analog audio tapes using AI, how to use soil analysis to pinpoint body transport locations, how to reconstruct a warehouse hallway with 3D simulation. Training courses started using the Athena case as a classic example of long-term disappearances without a body, where seemingly lost evidence could resurface during audits or with modern forensic techniques. The plant, once the site of the entire story, held a small memorial. There was no fanfare, just a few former employees, and Athena's family placing flowers. Warehouse number 3 was permanently sealed and converted into a safety training area. People who had worked alongside Athena recalled that she was always serious about every procedure, always reminding coworkers of each inspection step. The way she vanished from the plant made many realize that overlooking even a small rule could push an entire production line into tragedy. Local newspapers published images of Athena's face at age 26, along with news of Samuel and Elliot's sentences. Many San Marcos residents sent messages of condolence to her family, even though more than 2 decades had passed since the night she disappeared. Some in the community said they had lived with an unanswered question for 20 years, and the trial's conclusion brought them some measure of relief. The complex forensic documents that once stayed behind the scenes were now openly discussed at professional conferences. Industrial safety coordinators across the state required facilities to adopt Athena-style deviation analysis, examining even minor operational errors as potential indicators that could lead to severe consequences if concealed. In the courthouse hallway, Athena's mother, now elderly, held an old photo of her daughter. She didn't speak, only gripped the frame tightly in her hands. Her emotion spread to many people present. A legal staff member quietly said that the family's persistent pursuit of justice was one of the reasons the file was reopened when the audit uncovered the mislabeled evidence box. At the press podium, the prosecutor spoke only one short sentence: "Justice in long cold cases always moves slowly, but that doesn't mean it disappears." When the final report was closed and the sentence took effect, those present in the courtroom understood that Athena's story had concluded on paper, but her influence continued to exist in the way people viewed responsibility in operations and in investigations. Athena vanished into the darkness, but the truth about her never did. The story of Athena Morelli is not just a journey to solve a case that stretched across 2 decades, it also reflects a very familiar reality in American life: the hidden danger of ignoring procedures, covering up violations, and downplaying personal responsibility in the workplace. Athena did not lose her life because of personal motive or complicated grudge. She lost it because she tried to protect a technical rule, something many people in factories, hospitals, construction sites, or laboratories across America face every day. When she said, "Don't move that outside," that was the voice of an employee upholding standards, standing up for the safety of the entire production line, while those around her were driven by fear of accountability. The mistakes of Samuel, Elliot, and Victor did not stem from malice, but from the choice to cover up, adjusting the camera, restraining Athena, cleaning the scene, driving vehicle 34 out to Cottonwood Creek. Actions that seemed like "we'll deal with it tomorrow" opened the door to an irreparable tragedy. The lesson for American society today is clear. When an economy relies on industrial labor and high-level technical operations, honesty and adherence to procedures must be seen as the foundation of ethics, not an option. From factories in Texas to research centers in California, or logistics lines in the Midwest, any act of bypassing procedures to cut corners can create severe consequences, not just for one individual, but for the entire community. The audit that uncovered the mislabeled evidence box, the AI technology that recovered the analog audio tape, and the cold case unit's use of the Athena case as an investigative model show that America has the capacity to correct mistakes, but we should not let those mistakes be paid for with human lives. Athena reminds us that justice can arrive late, but responsibility must come right from the start. If you value the journey to uncover the truth for Athena Morelli, please hit subscribe to join us in the next investigative stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, where justice and truth continue to be revealed.